Hello again, juniors and seniors taking the Literature AP exam. This is the third of 5 videos that I want you to review before Community Day on April 19th when we have a 10 to noon AP review session. In the last couple of videos, we looked at the overview of the test. We looked at the multiple choice section, and then we looked at the poetry analysis section. Today we're going to look, or in this video, we'll look at the prose analysis section. It's the second of 2 essays you'll be asked to write. So that in mind, we share my screen. Let's go to our OneNotes, right? And again, you'll find these Lit AP resources in the content library of your OneNote, right? We've covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pages. We're at the prose analysis review. So let's take a look at that. So again, the essays, you're going to have to write 3 essays in 2 hours. This is the second of the 3 essays. We covered the poetry analysis last time. Here is prose analysis. Prose means you're going to get passages either from, an excerpt from a novel or an excerpt from a play. Once again, as I mentioned in that first video, you don't have to worry about whether or not you've read those excerpts before. You will not have, in all likelihood, right? It's not testing you on content you already know. It's testing you on reading comprehension skills and writing skills, right? So this page is organized very similarly to the way in which I organize the poetry analysis review page. I've showcased 3 different AP prompts, right? Then I've shown you some sample thesis statements and so on. So here's the first one from 2018, right? You've got a prompt here on top. You've got a passage. Notice the passage is not that long that you're going to be asked to write about. I have put the prompt up here for our convenience. Let's take a look at it. So the prompt says, the following exchange, written from an 1852 novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, occurs when 2 characters who have been living on the Blythedale farm, a community designed to promote an ideal of equality achieved through communal rural living, are about to part ways. Read the passage carefully. In a well-written essay, analyze how Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia through the use of literary techniques. Right. So, first thing to notice, that word how, which we've seen before. How means technique, right? How does Hawthorne portray this, right? And they're asking you to do that through the use of literary techniques. Now notice, there they keep it wide open. Instead of saying through the literary techniques such as point of view, figurative language, and syntax, they're not doing that here, right? They're just saying whatever literary techniques you want. So you want to think about maybe 2 or 3 different techniques. And what are you addressing by looking at those techniques? This notion right here, how Hawthorne portrays the author's attitude towards Zenobia. That's what you're looking for. What is the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, right? It's not asking you for a thematic claim. Not a problem, right? It's asking you for the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, right? So structural model for a thesis. You'll notice that these structural models I'm presenting are very similar to the ones that I presented for the poetry analysis. You want to begin, I think, by defining the techniques you're going to examine. We'll put that in green. And then you have your claim. Hawthorne, the author, illustrates, or you could say showcases, suggests, reveals, whatever purpose verb you want, right? And it's whatever you pinpoint as the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. You have to define that, right? So let's take a look at what a student who did well, right, at that thesis statement here, right? So here's the thesis of an actual student who took the test and did well, right? And here is the thesis. Notice how it follows the structure that we've been talking about here. With a first-person perspective, lavish imagery, and probing dialogue, those are the techniques, the prose establishes the narrator's initial bewilderment and later disdain for the second character, Zenobia, right? So you've got the 2 parts there, define, which is what you want to do in your thesis statement, right? And as I mentioned before, remember that intros don't have to be long. It can be like 3 or 4 sentences and then your thesis. Then you have 2 body paragraphs, maybe 3, and then a conclusion, even if the conclusion is short, right? And I'll talk more about that in another video, right? In terms of intros, body paragraphs, conclusions. But for right now, this is what you're shooting for, this thesis, right? And notice how the techniques are defined. It's not through point of view imagery and dialogue. It's first person perspective, lavish imagery, and probing dialogue. Okay, fantastic. And then you establish the claim. You don't want to say in your claim, right, that something like Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. Don't replete the prompt. Define what they're asking you to define. Okay. Also notice that it says here the prose establishes the narrator's initial bewilderment. That sounds kind of awkward, but again, the mantra at AP, and I mentioned this in the last video, is reward students for what they do well. They understand that in 40 minutes, you're not going to write your most polished essay, right? You don't have a few days to develop it. Probably the student wouldn't say the prose establishes. They say something like Hawthorne establishes, right? Instead, doesn't matter, right? That's a small thing. All right, let's get another one. Here is another, and notice the length. Not that long, right? There is a prompt. I put the prompt up front here. Let's read it together. In the passage below from The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, 1751 by Tobias Smollett, Mr. Pickle encounters Godfrey Gauntlet, the brother of his beloved Amelia. Consider how the two men confront their own uncontrolled emotions and yet attempt to abide by their social norms. In a well-developed essay, analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. You may wish to consider such literary techniques as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone. Okay, so all the background you need for these passages, they give it to you here, right? Like right there, it says Mr. Pickle encounters Godfrey Gauntlet, the brother of his beloved Amelia. That's all the background you need. They're not expecting you to have read this passage, as I mentioned before, right? Now, let's look for these key words. How. How means, we've said it before, technique or device or elements, you know? And notice that here, they follow up on the how. These are the things you might want to look at. You may wish to consider such literary techniques as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone, right? Now then, right, what is the prompt you're going to address in terms of, you know, pinpointing how techniques suggest a certain claim, right? You want to explore how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety, right? There it is. That's what you got to look at, right? And notice the word complex. That'll sometimes appear. So complex means it's not simple, right? There's something complex going on. There's some sort of interplay between emotions and social propriety. Propriety means social appropriateness, right? So again, a structure model for a thesis would be something like this. Define your techniques through these particular techniques. The author reveals, and then whatever it is you pinpoint as the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage, right? Again, that two-part thesis, right? Here is my textual focus. Here is the claim I'm going to make. Now, here is what an actual student wrote once upon a time, right? From the AP reservoirs, right? Here is a student who did well, right? The entire essay was strong. Let's look at the thesis and what that looked like. Smollett uses quick dialogue and a hurried narrative pace to demonstrate the conflict between Peregrine and Godfrey's heedless anger and acting within social norms, revealing how society's rules governing behavior hinder and help people from acting on natural instincts. Now, first thing is, seems a little bit wordy, right? But again, the AP mantra, reward students for what they do well. They understand, those assessing these things, that you are under the pressure of time. They are not going to worry if it's a little wordy, as long as you have the two parts of the thesis and it showcases a good understanding of the passage, right? So here are the techniques this person is going to be focusing on, right? Smollett uses quick dialogue and a hurried narrative pace, right? And notice that this person is referring back to, all right, I'm going to look at dialogue and narrative pace. Not mentioning tone, that's fine. You don't have to do all of them necessarily. You have a lot to say about dialogue and pace, great, right? So quick dialogue and a hurried narrative pace to demonstrate what? The conflict between these two characters, heated anger and acting within social norms, right? Revealing how, there's the overall claim, a little wordy, but that's fine. society's rules governing behavior hinder and help people from acting on natural instincts. That's kind of interesting, right? And that goes back to this complex interplay between emotions and social propriety, right? This writer has pinpointed how what's really at stake is the way in which society's rules governing behavior hinder and help. Sounds complex to me. People from acting on natural instincts, right? So again, when we look at these, we see that all of these thesis statements are pinpointing the how, the techniques, and articulating the claim they're going to prove, right? One more from 2017, excuse me, we just did that one. From 2016, right? An excerpt from the mayor of Casterbridge, right? And I only excerpted part of that. I didn't do the whole thing. Nor did I do the whole thing for the second one, actually, right? I'm just showing you parts. But again, we're focusing on, looking at the prompt and thinking about how we can forge good thesis statements on these things. So here is the prompt, last one, prose analysis. In this excerpt from Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, Michael Henchard and his daughter, Elizabeth Jane, are reunited after years of estrangement. During this separation, Henchard has risen from poor seasonal farm worker to wealthy mayor of a small country town, while Elizabeth, his daughter, has supported herself waiting on tables at a tavern. And notice that all of this here, what I just read, all of that is the background. They're saying to you, that's all you need to know about this passage. They definitely don't expect you to have read The Mayor of Casterbridge. Maybe you did, but probably not. They're just giving you all the background you need to understand this passage and write a brief essay on it, right? All right, so the prompt. After the background, it says, read the passage carefully, paying particular attention to tone, word choice, and selection of detail. Compose a well-written essay in which you analyze Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship between the two characters. So again, they're asking you to look at specific elements, also called techniques, also called devices, right? So think about tone, word choice, and selection of detail, right? Hey, DDIST, right? Diction is word choice. Detail, selection of detail, right? Tone, voila, there it is, right? So you've heard DDIST, maybe in your mind ad nauseum. Here is why. This is the skill the AP is asking you to showcase, right? Critical thinking and critical reasoning, right? Through analysis. So in paying attention to those things, compose a well-written essay in which you analyze what? Here is the prompt, right? Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship between the two characters, right? So notice again that you're finding that word complex. It's a complex relationship. There's nothing simple about it, right? So let's take a look again. Structural model, we've done this before. You're trying to pinpoint the elements that you want to examine and how those elements reveal a claim. Through these elements, Hardy reveals, suggests, etc. Whatever it is you pinpoint as a complex relationship between the two characters, right? So let's look at another student sample thesis, right? Between Henchard's verbal aggressions and his shift toward icy verbal neglect, even as Elizabeth Jane changes her behavior to please him, this passage suggests that though the father and daughter have been physically united, they remain largely estranged on an emotional level. So notice that the first half here is basically pinpointing the techniques I'm going to look at, right? Also called devices, also called literary elements, right? So this person's going to look at the verbal aggressions and his shift towards icy verbal neglect, right? In order to prove that the passage suggests this notion, right? Though the father and daughter have been physically reunited, they remain largely estranged on an emotional level. And notice how that suggests something complex is going on. Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship, it's complex, this writer is suggesting, because they've been physically reunited, but they are emotionally estranged. They're together physically, but emotionally apart, right? Sounds complex to me, right? Okay, so once again, right, when we look at all of these sample thesis statements, they are doing what the AP prompts are asking you to do, and they're all going to look like this, right? we've looked at the poetry and the prose prompt right now, and you're noticing the same thing. They're asking you to showcase your skills of literary analysis, which is what we've been teaching in the English department from freshman year onward, certainly junior, senior year. We're looking very carefully at, what is your claim? How do you know? The how do you know? Those are the literary techniques, the devices, the elements, right? And they suggest this claim that you're going to make, right? So again, these are skills you've been practicing in English classes again and again and again. And I hope that this sort of helps you understand how to structure your thesis statements, right, for these two sections, the poetry and the prose section. Okay. All right. If we go back now, right, to this page, the literary AP resources, just as I did for the poetry sections, I'm including here, right, two prose prompts, right, that you can look at and you can do practice on your own as you wish before the test. Not a bad idea. Any practice you do, you are certainly free to come by and talk to me about it in terms of feedback I might want to give you, or any of your English teachers, right? They can also give you feedback on these things. But this is the way to practice, right? You can do full responses where you take 40 minutes, no more, right? Again, take 10 to 15 minutes to read the prompt, to maybe annotate the passage a little bit, plan your essay. Don't start writing without planning, however briefly that plan might be. And then you just, after you've planned it out, you write. Be aware of what your thesis is going to be and what you think you'll cover in the first body paragraph and in the second body paragraph. And then you just go, right? Okay. You can also do detailed outline responses, as it says here, which means taking about 20 minutes to read and annotate your it says poem here. It should say the prose prompt. Let me change that. The prose passage. Hammer out a thesis statement, provide topic sentences for your 2 or 3 body paragraphs, indicate the evidence you might use. That can be helpful too in terms of preparation. And when we meet, right, on Community Day for a AP review, we'll practice either the poetry or the prose prompt, right? One of these two. Okay. All right. Just a couple more videos after this one. We're going to look at the literary argument, the third of the 3 essays, right? And then after that, we'll look at the essay grading scale and some final tips for these essays. All right. Thank you for your attention.